Hi everyone, and welcome to my next video tutorial where I'll be teaching you all how you can deploy a Django web app to render with a Postgres database. Now, I have made a lot of tutorials on deploying Django applications to cloud service providers. So it has spawned from Railway to Python Anywhere to Elastic Beanstalk to AWS Fargate. And I must say that even though I think Railway is the best option for free deployment, I think Render is possibly going to come in as a strong second. So one of the things that I really love about Render is it is extremely simple, and I really love the UI of the dashboard and everything. It's very simple and user-friendly. All right, so that being said, another thing that I want to mention, of course, as I said in the title, there is a free plan available in terms of the web server and also in terms of the Postgres database. Of course, there will be a limitation to this free service in terms of compute power and usage. But anyway, I think I've said enough on Render, so let's actually get started. So one thing that I want to mention first of all is make sure that you have a GitHub account. Now, in all of my video tutorials, I do add all of the relevant links in the description below. So if you're unsure of how to get to GitHub, I'll just attach a link in the description below. And you can go ahead and sign up for a GitHub account. So you can go ahead and create your GitHub account. So as you can see here, I am logged into my GitHub account as of this moment. So make sure you've gone ahead and created your GitHub account and that you're signed into it. It's very important that you're also signed into it, and I'll explain why that is in just a moment. So once you have that GitHub account and you're signed in, you can head over back to render.com and you can go ahead and click on Get Started. Okay. All right, so we're going to register for our Render account, or sign up as they say. And there are 4 different ways in which we can sign up. We can sign up with GitHub, with GitLab, Google, and manually here with the email and password. Now, what I want you to do is go ahead and choose the GitHub option here. And the good thing is when we click on GitHub here, you're going to see that it's going to ask for authorization to your GitHub account. This is why it's important that you have that you are logged into your GitHub account. It will automatically recognize your username, and basically all Render wants to do, it wants to verify your identity on GitHub and know which resources it can access. So basically all we want Render to do is access our repository, which we will create soon enough, so we can give it access and authorize Render. Okay, so it's going to redirect, and what's going to happen now is it's going to go ahead and ask us to confirm our email. So we can go ahead and say complete sign up. Okay. And it's going to say here, we've sent you an email at so-and-so, so at your email. So you can head over to your email and you can click on render. So the first email here is just GitHub saying that it has approved a third party. So this is Render. And here is just asking us to activate our Render account. So we can go ahead and just activate it by clicking on the following link. Okay. All right, perfect. So we can now see on the right a notification that says email confirmed, and we're ready to go. Perfect. So if you got to this stage, this means that you successfully created your Render account. So something I want to mention, of course, is the pricing. So you'll see a notification up here that says that pricing has changed. Please read more on our pricing page. So what I'm going to do is click here on pricing page. And here you can just read a little bit more detail and in depth for how much everything will cost here. So I wouldn't say it's too much. I mean, it's fairly cheap. Okay, so of course the individual tier here is what we're going to make use of, which is free. So we're going to make use of the individual tier. Of course, you can upgrade if you wish to team, organization, or enterprise, which is custom, and the choice is yours. So what you can do now is just head over to your dashboard. Okay, so here you are, and you can see all of the services that we can make use of, ranging from static sites, web services, Postgres, Redis, etc. It really is quite vast. So what I want to do is just close this notification here. Let's close that and close this dashboard here, and I just want to refresh the page. Okay, there we go. So that's fine. And I just want to close this Render dashboard. Okay, and here we are. So make sure you set up your render account. So it's very simple and very easy to go ahead and create. Right. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and create our Postgres database here. So what you can do is you can go ahead and just say new Postgres SQL, or what you can do is just click here on the right, which is much easier. You can say new, and you can scroll down here and choose Postgres. All right. And we can just go ahead and do that. Now this is very simple. All you need to do is just give a name for your database. I'm going to call mine production database. Okay, you can name it anything that you want. Okay, you can set a region here. I prefer US East. Okay, Ohio US East, and that's it. That's all you need to do. So set your region, assign a name to your database, and you can choose a pricing here. I'm just going to keep it on the free tier here, of course, that's fine. And all we can do is go ahead and create our database. Just keep in mind here that all free database will expire in 90 days, and it will be deleted if we do not upgrade it to another instance type. So just keep that in mind in case you're wondering why your database is just missing. So go ahead and create your database. Okay. Now this is going to take a while, okay? As you can see, the status is creating. So this will probably take maybe 10-15 minutes. Maybe 10 minutes is about a good waiting time, I would say. And we can see everything is just being generated for us as you scroll down, such as our username, our database, port, external, internal database URLs, a little bit on access controls, IPv4, IPv6 addresses was our CIDR block notations. So you can read a little bit there. So what I prefer to do is just click back on the dashboard here. And if we can see it's already set up. That's very quick. Usually it takes some time. So we can click on our production database now. And we can now see that it is available. So it's quite quick actually. So everything is set up. We have our host name, port, database, username, which was already there before. But now we can see we have a password, an internal database URL, external database URL, and a PSQL command. So of course, we're going to include these settings in our Django application. And just to give you guys a little bit of context here, so our internal database URL, so basically this is the URL we're going to use internally within the render cloud infrastructure, and our external database URL is something that we can make use of in our external applications, such as our Django application. So it's just a way to connect to our database from different environments, you could say. So internally, we're going to access it through render, and externally through our application. But don't think about this too much, okay? Because it doesn't really matter so much about these URLs. At the end, we're going to connect to the same database, okay? So just a little bit of context there for you guys, all right? So make sure, if you head over to dashboard, make sure that your database is in the available state. Right, so let's move on. So just for clarity here, I have a simple Django application, so it only has a template that basically has one page that says hello from Mars, so it's very simple. So if I were to give you a bit of a preview of my application, so all I've done is I've created a simple app, created a template called index.html that says hello from Mars in a h1 tag. That's literally it. There's nothing else, nothing nefarious or strange here. Of course, I have my allowed host, secret key, debug. I haven't modified that yet. We will get to that momentarily, but basically everything is very simple, straightforward. There's nothing weird or tricky or anything like that. All right, so to make use of a Postgres database in Django, we need to go ahead and install a package. Now, the package that we should install is called psychopg2 binary. Okay, so this is basically a Python Postgres database adapter. So it's going to help us if we want to make use of a Postgres database within Django applications. Now, usually you can make use of just the psychopg2, but the psychopg2 has issues usually when you're deploying. It's better to use the binary version. That's just from my experience. So what you can do, of course, is head over to your application. So here is where my project is currently located. So just to give you clarity, so I've created just a simple folder on the desktop with my Django project was in that. And of course, you can see the location that I've seeded in. I also have a virtual environment here, just outside my project. That's where I prefer to keep it. As you can see, I'm currently within it. So if I were to type in the command pip list, so just type that in. As you can see here, I only have Django. Okay, all the other packages here are just part of pip and all the sub packages that come along with installing Django, because when you install Django, you also install other packages. So don't worry about the rest. It's all part of Django. So all you'll have here is probably the same as me. All I've done is I've gone ahead and just set up a simple application and only installed the Django package within my virtual environment, along with pip, which is the default. But more on that later when we create our requirements.txt file. Then you can see exactly what I use, and I will explain in detail, so you don't need to worry. Anyway, so let's get back to psychopg2 binary, and we can just type cls. And what I want to do is go ahead and install that package. So I'm just going to copy it, go ahead and install it like so. And there we go, so it's been installed, so we can now say pip list. Let's verify that. So psychopg2, it's installed, great. Perfect, so that's the first package that we need to actually make use of Postgres database in our Django application. Something I want to mention before I go on, I do take my time when I explain concepts, so I do apologize for those of you that want to really get going, but just to be clear so you actually understand what's going on, I think it's best for me to explain in detail rather than rushing over it, because you're just going to try and learn the same thing twice, where you can just do it once if you have a better understanding. But to be honest, you can skip ahead if it's a little bit annoying. I completely understand, so it's no problem. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and install this package called DJ database URL. So let me explain why we need this package. So to remotely connect to our render Postgres database, we need to configure our external database URL. So if you click on your database, you'll see here we have an external database URL, and this is what we need to configure in our Django application. Okay, and this package here, DJ database URL, is going to help us to make this configuration to connect our external database, to connect to our Postgres database using the external database URL to our Django application. Okay, and basically this package is going to transform this database URL, which we have right here. I won't show, well, I can show it, doesn't really matter. So this database URL here, it's going to transform this database URL into Django's database parameters, such as user and database, the DB name, so name, port, host name, it has all of that in place. So to give you a bit of a better idea of the markup of these database URLs, I will attach a useful link in the description below, which actually shows you the markup for this URL in terms of the user, the name, all of that, all of the parameters that you'll usually see for your database configuration. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so we can go ahead and install that package. So let's go ahead and install that. So DJ database URL. There we go, perfect. Okay, and let's do the next one. So the next one that we need to do, of course, is we need to make use of a package that helps us to make use of environment variables in Django. Now, there are many packages that you can use. I prefer Django Environ or Python decouple. Of course, you can make use of your own ones as you wish. You can use .env, it's really up to you. I just prefer Django Environ because it's very simple and easy to make use of. It's not difficult or anything. So as if you guys are unaware of what's the point of this package, so it's used to help us to create environment variables, and environment variables are used to keep all of our sensitive information private, and a typical example of that will lie in our external database URL. So typically you would also add other things to keep that private, but this is just one use case. All right, so we can go ahead and copy that, go ahead and install it. Right, Django Environment, let's check it. So I like to be thorough here. So let's see what we have. So DJ database URL installed, Django Environment installed, PG2 binary, Django Environment all set. Great. So we've installed most of the packages. There are more, but we'll get to that soon enough. So what we can do is just close these up. For now, that's fine. Okay, so we've got everything set and installed. So that's that. So make sure you've installed the following packages. So DJ database URL, Django environ, and Psycho PG2 binary. Okay, so make sure you've got that all in place. So we can head over to our application. So head over to your own Django applications, because what we're going to do next is we're just going to configure everything accordingly. Right, so next we can start to define our render Postgres database settings as follows. So we're going to head over to our settings.py file. So head over to your settings.py file. All right, and what you can do is just find a good place to enter in your render Postgres SQL database credentials and information. So here is what we're currently using, the SQLite database here. So what I'm going to do is just comment that out. Okay, and just comment this out. So this is what we're using as of this moment. So I'm just going to comment out the SQLite database. So here we have the render Postgres database, and we are going to make use of that DJ database URL because we need to bring in this external database URL. Okay, so that was the whole point of that package from earlier. So what you can do here is say import DJ underscore database URL. Okay. And then what we need to do is just add some markup. So I'm going to say databases equals and open my curly braces. And it's literally just going to be one line. And all we're going to do is say default. And I'm going to add my colon. And here I'm going to say DJ underscore database URL dot parse. And in quotes here, we're just going to add quotes. What we need to do is we need to pass in this external database URL. So we can go ahead and copy that, and we can add that in like so. But, okay, this is where our environment variables come in. This isn't a very secure way of doing it. Okay, it's not the best way of doing it either. So this is the whole point of making use of our environment variables, because this can be seen as sensitive information, which in fact it is, because you don't want anyone to externally connect to your database, even if they don't know your database peripherals and information. This is very insecure. So there's no need to do this. We can just take this out. Okay, but that's just one way you can do it if you wish, and remove the quotes. So what we need to do is we need to set up our environment variables. So that is what we need to do. So you can go all the way up and scroll to the top. So something I want to mention before we import Django environ is sometimes you'll get a warning at the bottom of certain packages. You may have already gotten a warning here under DJ underscore database URL. And the reason for that is sometimes you need to make sure that your Python interpreter is set up correctly. So what I mean by that is you have your virtual environment folder here. So if I go out, if I open my project here, I have a virtual environment folder. So sometimes you need to set up that interpreter. So what you need to do is just say Control, Shift, and P on your keyboard. So again, Control, Shift, and P at the same time, and it's going to open up this menu here. So what you can do is you can say Python, select interpreter. And what I like to do is go ahead and say enter interpreter path. Okay. And then what I do is I head over to my virtual environment folder of my project, copy that location, and head over to Visual Studio Code, enter in that path, and go ahead and just press enter. Okay. So if I press Control, Shift, and P and select interpreter, we can see we have one selected. So of course, that's also set to my Python version as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right. Right, so let's carry on where we were. So we want to set up our environment variables. So we already have installed the Django environment package, but we actually need to import it. So right here at the top of your settings.py file, I just want to actually close that folder. What we can do here is we can just say import environ. Okay. Next thing that we need to do is we need to initialize our environment variables with environ. So to do that, we can just say env is equal to environ.env in parentheses, and we can say environ .env.read_env. So we're just configuring and setting up our environment variables to be configured. All right, next thing that we need to do is we need to create our .env file. So what I suggest is when you create your .env file is you must create it within the directory where your settings.py file exists. So I'm just going to say right click here on Elevate, new file, call it .env. And also another helpful tip here, when you are adding environment variables, etc. to your .env file, make sure when you upload it to GitHub that you make use of git ignore, and you git ignore your .env file when you're uploading code to your repository. So just keep that in mind. Okay, perfect. So that's set and ready to go. So we have our .env file set. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to set up our environment variables. So you can use it for whatever you wish. Okay, so a good start would be your secret key. It can also be your database URL as well. So there are several things that you can go ahead and make use of. So the one thing that you need to bear in mind with this Django environ package is you cannot use quotes when you're assigning your environment variable. So for example, if I was making use of the secret key here, I would have to copy everything within the quotes. And the same thing as well with the external database URL. They cannot be quotes for strings. So I'm going to go ahead and define it as database_URL. And I'm going to say equals, and all I'm going to do is head over to render, and I'm going to copy the external database URL. So make sure you copy the external database URL, not the internal, because external, we're using it outside of Django. So you can go ahead and copy to the clipboard and paste it in, like so. Make sure you don't have any quotes, leave it just as is right next to it. Now we have database URL, and we want to reference this in our settings.py file. So head over to your database here where you're instantiating your render Postgres database. And here in parse, all you want to do is you want to use the environment variable markup, which is env. And in parentheses, we can go ahead and add in that secret key, which we so-called named database URL. And we can add that like so. Okay. So that's all you need to do to get this up and running. So you just need to say env, and then within parentheses, you can just put in the quotes. All right. So let me show you how this is done. So what we can do now is we can just say Python manage.py run server. Okay. And you'll automatically see that it says you have 18 unapplied migrations. So this implies that we in fact are connected to our Postgres database in Django because it's saying we have unapplied migrations. Now let me show you if I take this out, clear that out, and let me remove this whole line just to show you what I mean. And rerun your server again. We can see we have an error here already because we're excluding this, but let me show you, for example, what's a better way? Let me comment this out for now, and let's rerun the server. Okay, you can see now that it's not showing any unapplied migrations, nothing at all. So this implies that we are correct. So let's go ahead and add and uncomment this now. So that means that we are connected to our database. env, and here. Now another thing I want to show you before we do this is just to help you grasp the idea of environment variables. So for example, if I were to change this to something else, and I say the underscore database URL, and I'm just referring here to database, what's it? The database URL. And I put it in incorrectly. Let's say I run my server, we can just double check here that this is inconfigured, and we can see here that it's actually reading from our .env file. So this tells us that Django environment is working as it should. Okay, so let me take that out. Okay, so now we're going to do it properly now. So here I have database underscore URL, And here in my environment variable, I'm calling this value here for Postgres, and it's going to be database underscore URL. Now let's go ahead and run this now properly. Okay, so the unapplied migration, perfect. Now we can actually go ahead and actually migrate everything as it should be. So we can migrate, so let's do that. So I'm going to say Python manage.py, and I'm going to say migrate. Okay. So it's going to make all those migrations for us so now we are connecting to our Postgres database in render. So that's effectively what we're doing now. So let's just wait for everything to connect. So what I'm going to do is pause the video because this will take a while, and I'll get back to you when this is done. So let's just wait for that. Right, perfect. So we can see the migrations were made. And what we can do next is create a super user. So I'm going to say Python manage.py, create super user. Okay. And what I want you guys to do is create a memorable super user, okay? So something very memorable. And the reason for this, I just want to prove to you guys, is the fact that we have an internal and external database URL. And I want to prove to you guys that if we have our external database URL set in Django and our internal database set in render, which I'll show you later on, just to prove that it's connected to the same database. So that is the reason why I'm asking you to create a memorable Django admin here. So I'm going to call this admin 100. So that's quite memorable for me. So choose something that will stand out, that you'll remember so you don't forget. Okay, email, I'm just going to leave that blank. Password, enter in a password. Perfect. And a CPU is created. Perfect. So let's just run our server. Let's just make sure we don't have any issues or any problems. Great. Okay, that's fine. Let me go to my application. Okay, that's fine. Perfect. All right, so that is good to go. So we've got that up and running as it should be. So our super user was created. Now, what we can actually do is we can actually go ahead and we can open our connect to the admin page. So we can go ahead and just put an admin and go ahead and enter in those credentials here. Perfect. And go ahead and log in. Okay, so the fact that it's taking some time is good because it's remotely connected to a cloud service. And there we go, we can see that is all set. Perfect. So we have connected to our Postgres database as it should be connected. All right, great. So we've got that out of the way. So the last things that we need to set up is just the final settings here. So feel free to also set your environment variable up for your secret key. Just remember, like I said, you cannot use quotes here in your database URL for strings. You need to remove those quotes. Just add in the raw value. Okay. Next, debug should be false. Allowed host, for now we can leave it as star. I will give you guidance later on, so we can just leave that as is. So make sure the most important thing is debug to be set to false. And yeah, that is pretty much what we need to do there. All right, so in order for our Django web application, okay, to connect to render properly and for us to actually deploy the application, we need to make use of a package or a service called gUnicorn. So gUnicorn is a HTTP server for Unix, and it's going to help us to bridge the connection of communication, you could say, between our Django application and the render web servers. So this is what we need. We need gUnicorn. And you could say in business terms, gUnicorn is sort of like the intermediary, like the middleman between, of course, Django and render. So we need to make use of this package. So what you can do, stop your server, and in your virtual environment, make sure you install the following package. So go ahead and do just that. There we go. And we can type pip list. Let's verify it. So gUnicorn, there we have it. Perfect. All right, so that is good to go. Now, the next thing we need to do, we can close this up. This is fine. We need to make sure that we install or we generate a requirements.txt file. So what you can do is you can go ahead and say pip freeze. Make sure you're in your virtual environment, so you install the packages in your virtual environment and not globally. greater than requirements.txt. Okay, there we go. You can see it just was created. Open this up, and these are all of my requirements. Is literally barely anything. So make sure, I'll zoom in for you. So make sure you use these for your first deployment. As I always say when I make video tutorials, make sure you start off your deployments very simple. Don't try and add a complicated project for your first time, because this will demotivate you to actually deploy your Django application the second time. So make sure at least the first time that you deploy the success, and then it'll give you motivation to go ahead and experiment with other packages. So this is what you should have at least in your application. In terms of the Django version, ASA, GetIf, SQL parse, and TZ data, that's going to depend on your Django version. But try to have a new Django version. I'd prefer maybe 4 and up, I would say. But make sure you also have PsychoPG2 binary for your Postgres database, gunicorn to bridge the connection between your Django application and render, Django environment for your environment variables, DJ database URL to help you to connect to your external, to your Postgres database using the external database URL. Okay, so make sure you've got these in place. What I'll do is I'll also add this, I think I'll pin it as a comment on the video, instead of the description. That will be a bit more clearer for you guys and more accessible. So just keep that in mind, you need these, all right? Perfect, so there are the requirements that we need, all right? So make sure you've got that in place and that you've configured all of the other settings accordingly. Right, so let's prepare everything and get everything organized. So what we can do is just close the following, and of course our local host. And what we can do, as we are in our production database settings, we can just click on dashboard and we'll see it right here. What we can do now is right click on render dashboard, duplicate it. So we're going to refer back to the database. That's the reason for opening another tab. You can head over to the dashboard, go ahead and say new, and you can choose web service. So this is for hosting our live server. Okay, and here we are on this page. Now, what you want to do first of all is head over to your GitHub account, and you want to create a repository. So go ahead and create your repository. Now, the repository name that I'm going to call now, of course, for those of you that know how to deploy to GitHub, you'll know there are 1,000,000 ways to do it. I'm just going to show you one way that's very simple. Of course, you can go ahead and make use of your own way via commands, etc. I'm just going to do a very simple way. So the repository name that I like to name it as would be the name of my folder, because what I usually do is create the repository with the name of my folder, and I'll click in my folder and into my Django project Elevate and copy everything within that. So that's what I usually do. So I'm going to name this dev. Description, I'm going to leave open. I'm going to keep it as public. I'm going to add a README file, and I'm going to create this repository. Okay, so go ahead and create your own repository. All right, there we have it, set and ready to go. And what we can do now is just drag our files here. It's very easy to do this. And I'm going to head into my project, dev. Elevate is my Django project. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy everything. Make sure that you have your requirements.txt file in place as well. So once you have that, head over to GitHub. And you can now just drag in all your files here that are necessary. Go ahead and drag that in here. Okay. All right, so it's just being uploaded. So this should be relatively quick. So some important things just to make sure. So make sure that you set allowed hosts, of course, earlier on here. Make sure you had the following settings here, allowed host to all, or else your deployment will fail. So make sure you have this set. But I did mention that earlier, so make sure, just double check. You can always edit your files here, it's not a problem. So once you've got that, once it's uploaded, you can scroll down and just commit those changes. So I'm just going to say here first, commit, and commit my changes. Okay, so it's just going to go ahead and process those files. Let's wait for that, so it shouldn't take too long. And then what we can do is go on with the next set of steps. So there we go. Our repository is all set. I'm logged in. My repository is called dev, and here is my code. Great, so what we can do now is connect our repository, but to do that we need to add explicit permissions to allow render to view our repositories. So I'm just going to drag GitHub here right next to it, and I'm going to say connect account. Okay, and now basically all render wants to do is access all of our repositories or select repositories, so you can choose which one. I'm just going to keep it as default and say all, scroll down and install it. Okay. All right, there we go. So render has been connected, and we can see now that it's connected to our repository here. So if we had all repositories, it would show all of the repositories, and we can now see we connected to my GitHub account here as well, and it's all set. Now, all you need to do is you need to go ahead and connect to that repository that you're connected to here and say connect. Okay. Perfect. So we only need to add in a few details here and not much here. So first of all, you want to enter in your application name. I'm going to call it Django app. You can choose your region. I'm leaving it as default. The branch, leave as default. Root, you can leave as default. Environment, you can leave. Build command, you can leave it as it's going to install all of the requirements in our txt file that we defined right here. So it's going to install all of these and configure it in the build. And here we need to set the start command. So this is where we bridge the connection, like I said earlier on, between our Django application and render itself. So I'm going to show you a good way of figuring this out. So what you can do is head over to your settings.py in Visual Studio, for example. Scroll down until you see something that says WSGI application. Now, as we know, GUnicorn is going to help us with this WSGI sort of bridging. So take a look at what the project name is here. So our project is called Elevate here, and it's defined here as well. So elevate.wsgi.application. So we need to make use of this in our GUnicorn here, but we need to add a colon here instead where it says WSGI to application. We need to add a colon. So this is where we're referencing it from. So you're going to want to reference your project. So what we can do is just remove app, and we can keep the GUnicorn there, and I'm just going to say elevate.wsgi, and instead of adding a dot, I'm going to add a colon and reference it to application, like so. Okay, so go ahead and add in the following for your own application with GUnicorn, and this is going to help to start the process. All right, so make sure you've got everything in place. You just really needed to add the name and configure your unique start command for GUnicorn. We're going to use the free instance type. And now we need to click on advanced. Okay, so now it gets important. And we need to add our environment to variables. So something that I want to mention, by default, render automatically makes use of Python 3.7, which is probably for most of us very old. So you need to explicitly here state your Python version, which is very strange. I mean, you'd think it would be in another section, but for some reason it's in the environments variable section here, but that's just how it is. Very strange. So go ahead and enter in your Python version. Okay, now something to note here, okay, try not to use an older version, less than 3.7, and try not to use one of the newer versions. I'm talking about Python 3.11, and a very new version like the latest, because usually there's bugs and issues with that, so I would rather wait until later versions come out. So a safe version, so remember we are using Django 4, in my Django 4. Let's see. We're using Django 4.1.6, and Django 4.1 is generally going to work nicely with anything from the late 3.8s, the whole 3.9 series, and most of the 3.10 series with Python. So a very safe bet to go would be 3.10.6. So Python 3.10.6 would be a very safe version. That's the one that I'm making use of. So I'd recommend this version. Okay, so sometimes you'll get an error where it says deploying forever if you use the wrong Python version. So do keep this in mind. This is one of the factors in terms of deployment failures. So make sure you choose an appropriate Python version for your Django version as well. Okay, one that is, you kind of have to wing this a bit. But 3.10.6 is something that I've tested that works nicely for the latest version of Django. So this is something that's a trial and error thing that you have to test and work on your own, okay? Once you're happy with that, you can add another environment variable, and this will be our database URL. So remember, we configured a database URL right here in our Django application. But in this case, if we head back to our production database in the other tab, we now need to refer to that internal database URL now. So external, we reference that in our Django application, but now we need to reference the internal database URL. So you can go ahead and copy that, the internal database URL, and you can put in here the value for that database URL. You can just set that right here. So that's all you need to add. You can add additional environment variables. Maybe you want to add in your secret key, debug equals to false, etc. And maybe you have access keys from AWS, I'm not too sure. You can just add those environment variables here. Just remember with Django Environ, you can't have quotes in your values, okay? So once you're happy with that, scroll down and go ahead and create the web service. And that's pretty much it. So let's create it. It'll just take a moment to create that service. Okay, and there we go. So it's just cloning, and it's cloning from GitHub, as you can see, checking out that latest commit that we went ahead and pushed. So this commit here, first commit, is just checking that out. And we can see here it's going to use this Python version 3.10.6, which is relatively new. It's going to install all of the packages, and it's just going to now build our application itself by generating a container image from our Django application. Now, do keep in mind that the build does take a few minutes, maybe about 5 to 7 minutes. I don't know, it really depends, can take longer. So it does take some time to set this up. Sometimes it's very fast, it really depends. So what I'm going to do is just pause the video until the build is complete and the deployment is complete, and then we will go from there and go into further detail. So let's just wait for this build to be completed first of all. All right, so we're back, and now you can see the page may have refreshed for you. It did refresh for me, and what you can do, you'll probably be refreshed to this page right up here at top, and it will say live, so you can see our application is now live. Now if you scroll down, you'll see all the dependencies were set up and our application was built. The build was completed, success, with a nice emoji there, and our application was deployed using the following gunicorn configuration that we set, and we can see everything's working as it should. Now the final verification is to right click and open this. This is effectively our URL, so we have a custom URL here, and we can right click and open that link in a new tab, and there we go. Our application is now hosted on Render. It's all set and ready to go. All right, so that's pretty much that, guys. So that is how you can go ahead and deploy your application to Render, making use of a Postgres database, and also going ahead and deploying your live server to Render. So that's that, guys. Right, so before we finish up, I just have one more thing I want to mention, and that is, some of you are probably wondering about static and media files or image files. So I would recommend making use of something known as Amazon S3 buckets. Now, in my opinion, this is the easiest and also the cheapest way to set up your static file structure. I do have a video on this, so I'll be sure to add that in the description below. And one more thing that you guys will probably have on your mind is the admin page. So you may notice that when you head over to the admin page, that you'll see that it's lost its styling a bit. So what I'll do is I'll add another link in the description below addressing this particular issue, and it will give you a solution to solve this. So it's a very quick fix. So I'd recommend that you go ahead and look into that. If you are wondering about the styling for the admin page, I will attach a link and make it very explicitly clear in the description below about that. All right, so that should address most of your queries. So we at least have our Postgres database up and running. We also have our Django application live, our live server. We have that also running. And of course, the static and media files, of course, you can check my Amazon S3 buckets video on how to set that up. And also, I'll also add a link to the solution to fixing the Django admin styling down below as well. That should fix that. The last thing I can think of is you're probably wondering about the domain name. So this looks quite boring and meticulous. So what you can do is you can add a custom domain name as well. That's also something that you can actually add to your application just to, use something different that looks a bit cleaner than this. Instead, you can go ahead and add that domain name. Right, so if you want to add this domain name, all you can do is scroll down here on the left, head over to settings. And you can scroll down, you can see all the pre-filled settings that you did before. Scroll down. And here you'll have custom domains. So we can see our server will always be available at the following domain name here. And we can also point this to a custom domain. And what you can do here is you can go ahead and click on add domain, look for a domain name, save it, and I'm sure it will take you through a process of going ahead and setting up the domain. Just remember, once you've set up your domain, remember in your allowed hosts setting in settings.py of your Django application to add in that custom domain under allowed hosts, or else you won't be able to actually access that domain. One final other thing that you will probably need if you're using a custom domain with HTTPS, be sure to set your CSRF trusted origin property as well. Very important. So I would also recommend looking into the CSRF trusted origin. So that's something that you're also probably going to have to set in your Django settings.py file with your domain. So remember those two things for later on if you want to use a custom domain. Okay guys, so I think that's pretty much it. This is a very long video, but I wanted to be thorough and give you as much detail as I could. So yeah, that's about it guys, and yeah, I'll attach everything that I said I will, and yeah, everything that I mentioned, so just check that out. And yeah, that's it guys, and as always, thank you for the support. I really appreciate it, and until next time, see you.